The Germans cracked the code of modern combat decades before the Pentagon. They studied the physics of the front line. The data was cold. Most infantry engagements happened at distances under 300 meters, often much closer. Full-power rifle cartridges were overkill. They were heavy, loud, and uncontrollable in rapid fire. Why carry a round designed for 1,000 meters when the enemy is across the street? The solution was the 7.92 by 33 mm Kurz. It used the same bullet as the Kar 98K, but the brass casing was shorter, one distinct metallic clank. The bolt of an StG-44 slams home. It sounds different from the thunderous roar of a full-sized Mauser. It is the sound of the first true assault rifle. The Kurz round sat in the sweet spot, more lethal than a pistol, more manageable than a heavy rifle. It offered the soldier more ammunition and less recoil. The United States ignored this reality for 20 years. While American G1s struggled with heavy wooden stocks and massive recoil in the jungles, the ghost of German engineering waited. The transition finally arrived between 1967 and 1969. The 5.56 NATO became the new standard. It was not a revolution. It was a correction of a 20-year mistake. By the 1970s, every major military on Earth followed suit. The era of the heavy caliber for every rifleman was over. While his successors scrambled to fix the caliber crisis, the father of the M1 reached his peak. On March 28, 1944, President Roosevelt personally awarded John Garand the Medal for Merit. The M14 was supposed to be the ultimate weapon. One rifle to replace the M1 Garand, the carbine, the grease gun, and the Browning automatic rifle. 4 tools merged into one steel frame. But in the jungles of Vietnam, this ambition turned into a liability. The soldier pulls the trigger on full auto. The first bullet hits the mark. The second jumps high. By the third round, the muzzle climbs toward the canopy. He is no longer aiming at the enemy. He is shooting at the sky. The recoil of the 7.62 NATO round makes the weapon uncontrollable in rapid fire. Was this the improved successor the Pentagon promised? The rifle weighs 11 pounds. It is 44 inches of steel and wood. That is 2 pounds heavier and several inches longer than the AK-47 carried by the Viet Cong. In the humid heat, the traditional wooden stock begins to swell. The wood presses against the barrel. The zero shifts. Accuracy vanishes. The terrain dictates the terms. Most engagements happen at distances under 300 meters. At this range, the M14 loses its only theoretical advantage, long-distance precision. Instead, the infantryman struggles with weight. He carries less ammunition than his adversary. He cannot maintain fire superiority. He is outgunned by a lighter, cheaper, and more reliable Soviet design. The grand experiment of a universal rifle failed the stress test of the jungle. Between 1967 and 1969, the military finally surrendered to reality. They pulled the M14 from the front lines and handed out the M16. The most ambitious project in American small arms history resulted in a standard service life of only 11 years. The disaster of the M14 was not born in the jungles. It was engineered 10 years earlier in the frozen mountains of Korea. Between 1950 and 1953, the M1 Garand remained the standard. It equipped the majority of United Nations infantry. But the battlefield had changed. The Americans were still carrying a weapon designed for a different era. The brass finally demanded a solution. They wanted the Garand's DNA, but without its flaws. A detachable box magazine. This was the detail soldiers had waited 20 years to see. It finally replaced the archaic N-block clips. The upgrade was significant. 20 rounds in a single magazine. This was 2.5 times the capacity of the standard Garand. In 1959, the Pentagon officially adopted the M14. It was essentially a modernized Garand. The engineers built it around the new 7.62 by 51 NATO cartridge. It was shorter than the old 30-06. It was supposed to be more efficient. The military attempted to solve every tactical problem with a single rifle. They added a selector switch for both semi-automatic and full automatic fire. The soldiers of 1940 faced a choice between a heavy rifle and a lighter compromise. The flaws that the M14 attempted to fix had already haunted infantrymen for 2 decades. A soldier crouches in a frozen foxhole. He has fired 5 rounds. 3 remain in the steel clip. He needs a full load for the next dash across no man's land. But the Garand is a closed system. He cannot simply thumb in more cartridges. To reset, he must eject the entire clip into the mud. The metallic clink of a half-empty clip hitting the dirt is the sound of wasted lethality. Some men choose to fire the remaining rounds into the air to trigger the automatic eject. They trade their position for a full magazine. It is a desperate, noisy ritual. The weight was the second enemy. A loaded M1 Garand with a leather sling weighed 10 pounds. Add a bayonet, and it climbed to over 11 pounds. Infantrymen felt every ounce in their shoulders during 20-mile marches. 10 pounds was the standard, but the M1903 Springfield it replaced was only 8.7 pounds. The gap was even wider with support gear. The M1 carbine weighed 5.2 pounds. The Garand was nearly twice as heavy as the carbine. Army ordnance reports from 1940 were blunt. The rifle was too cumbersome for radio men, staff officers, and artillery crews. It was a burden that pulled the soldier toward the earth. A detachable box magazine would have solved the reloading crisis, but the American military establishment refused to move. While American infantry struggled with the Garand's weight, their allies and enemies fought a losing battle against mechanics that simply failed. Reliability became the ultimate human factor. The Soviets tried first with the SVT-40, 10-round detachable magazine, high rate of fire. On paper, it was the perfect weapon. In the mud of the Eastern Front, it was a liability. Soviet tests revealed a 10% failure rate. The Garand's failure rate sat at 1.75%. Soviet conscripts couldn't maintain the complex gas system. Ammunition quality varied too much. Moscow eventually chose the cheap bolt-action Mosin Nagant. Reliability won over firepower. The Japanese attempted a desperate shortcut. They developed the Type 4. It was a direct mechanical clone of the Garand. But by 1945, the Japanese industry was a ghost. They produced only 250 rifles. This total was less than the daily output of a single Springfield armory workshop. The Garand remained the only functional semi-automatic system on the planet. It worked because it was simple. It was adaptable. The infantryman could transform his rifle into a mobile mortar. He used the M7 series launcher. This was a basic steel tube. It slipped over the muzzle and locked onto the bayonet lug. The attachment blocked the gas port. The rifle became a manual bolt action. The soldier loaded a special blank cartridge. Pressure built. The grenade launched. A single rifleman could hit a bunker from 200 yards away. Berlin realized its mistake too late. Production of the Gewehr 43 began in October 1943, when the strategic initiative had already slipped away. By then, the Reich was fighting a war of exhaustion. The engineers stopped inventing and started stealing. They ripped the short-stroke gas piston design directly from the Soviet SVT-40. It worked. The G-43 was lighter than its predecessor and featured a 10-round detachable box magazine. But the finish told the real story. Instead of the polished, machined steel of the pre-war years, soldiers held rough, stamped metal parts. The edges were jagged. The weld marks were visible. It was the face of an industry at its breaking point. Why copy the Soviets instead of the Americans? The SVT gas system was simpler to manufacture under the reign of Allied bombs. But simplicity could not fix the math of a collapsing empire. Germany had 18 months left. They were still pouring resources into tanks and aircraft, while their infantry fought with bolt-action rifles from 1935. American factories produced 5.4 million M1 Garands. German production of the G-43 reached only 400,000 units. Before the Germans copied the Soviet gas system, their engineers created a mechanical nightmare. The High Command issued a bizarre mandate: No holes in the barrel, not one. They feared drilling would weaken the steel or ruin accuracy. Why complicate a rifle with a muzzle trap? The Army forbade gas ports. Designers had to use the bang system. It was a workaround that defied logic. The G-41 was the result. 10 rounds, stripper clips, 7.92mm Mauser. On paper, it was a competitor. In the mud, it was a disaster. The muzzle assembly was a collection of tiny, precision parts. One shot released a cloud of carbon. The residue settled deep into the threads. It didn't just stay there, it baked. A soldier in a freezing trench tries to clean his weapon. His fingers are numb. He unscrews the muzzle cap. The smell of acrid, burnt powder hits first. Then the soot. It coats the fine springs and sliders. One dropped screw in the dirt, and the rifle is a club. The heat fused the parts together. Corrosion started within hours. The mechanism didn't just fail, it rotted from the inside. Reliability plummeted. American testers later submerged the G-41 in sludge. It choked instantly. The Garand, by comparison, kept firing. The numbers tell the story of a systemic collapse. Mauser produced only 6,700 units of their specific variant. 1,700 of those were returned as completely scrap. That is a 25% failure rate straight from the factory. Total production across all models reached 120,000. It was a massive waste of steel and man-hours. The design was dead on arrival. The rifle was a victim of a fundamental engineering error. German engineers were still drafting blueprints while the result already lay in the Pacific mud. 1942, Guadalcanal. The 1st Marine Division waded into the jungle carrying the Springfield bolt action from the Great War. It was a choice of tradition, not a lack of supply. The Marines mistrusted the gas-operated newcomer. They feared the salt, the humidity, and the grit. But the first contact changed everything. Why did Japanese officers report facing entire machine gun battalions where only infantry stood? The volume of fire. A single squad of M1 Garand sounded like a heavy weapon nest. The Japanese had never encountered this rhythm. The banzai charge began at the jungle's edge. Hundreds of soldiers screamed and surged forward with fixed bayonets. They expected a gap between shots, the 3-second window while a bolt cycles. It never came. American riflemen didn't reach for bolt handles. They kept their cheeks pressed to the wood. They pulled the triggers as fast as they could reset. The sound of dozens of semi-automatics merged into a single, continuous wall of lead. Japanese intelligence was paralyzed by the math. They estimated the number of American machine guns was 10 times higher than reality. Their tactical maps were wrong because they couldn't believe a standard rifle could bite this hard. The charges hit a physical barrier of steel. Soldiers were cut down 40 yards from the wire. The human wave reached nothing but the dirt. The distance between the muzzle and the target became a graveyard. In November 1942, Operation Torch began. While Japanese forces fell to the M1 Garand in the Pacific, German troops in North Africa finally met the same mathematics. Reality did not match the newsreels. Cinema creates a myth of the German soldier. You see the MP-40 submachine gun in every frame. You see the futuristic StG-44 or the FG-42 paratroop rifle. The Wehrmacht looks like a force from the future. The truth was made of wood and bolt-action steel. Expectation, a squad armed with rapid-fire automatics. Reality, the same rifle their fathers carried in the Great War. German industry produced 1.1 million MP-40s. They built 430,000 StG-44s. These numbers were drops in the ocean. For every StG-44 in the field, there were 32 KAR-98K rifles. The KAR-98K was the backbone of the Reich. It was slow. It was manual. It was a 19th century concept fighting a mid-20th century war. From the invasion of Poland to the ruins of Berlin, the bolt action remained the standard. Between 1934 and 1945, Germany manufactured 14 million KAR-98K rifles. 14 million KAR-98K rifles turned the German infantry into a support crew for the MG-42. This was a doctrinal trap. In the First World War, the bolt action was the king of the trenches. 25 years later, Berlin still bet the empire on the same manual cycle. The German squad didn't revolve around the rifleman, it revolved around the machine gun. The MG-34 and MG-42 dictated the rhythm of the fight. They provided the lead, they provided the suppression. Riflemen became servants to the mechanism. Their primary job was simple: carry the ammunition, protect the gunner, feed the belt. A German squad was a tripod for a single weapon. To keep one MG-42 firing, the Wehrmacht sacrificed the autonomy of 10 men. It required 3 soldiers just to operate the weapon effectively. The American soldier was an independent fire unit. The German was a logistics component. The Allies used automatics to support the infantry. Germany used the infantry to support the machine gun. It worked until the barrel overheated or the belt jammed. In individual skirmishes, the bolt action was a relic. German commanders watched their squads wither under the superior fire volume of the Garand. High Command finally moved to bridge the gap with the G-43. They realized too late that a bolt action could not win a semi-automatic war. The German infantrymen sacrificed tactics for the machine gun. The American soldier gained a 300% advantage through a single engineering decision. What does a soldier lose every time he cycles a bolt by hand? Visual contact. With the Springfield M1903, the eyes left the target. The hand moved, the cheek left the stock. Total reset time, 2.5 seconds. The M1 Garand reduced this to 0.3. The barrel recoils, the brass casing flies right, the bolt slams forward. But the shooter's head remains fused to the wood. This is the cheek weld. It is the physics of survival. The soldier fires all 8 rounds as fast as he can pull the trigger. His hands never move. His eye never leaves the sight. The rate of aimed fire increased 2.5 to 3 times over the old bolt-action standard. It was the first semi-automatic rifle adopted as a standard issue by any major power. The advantage was raw. It was mathematical. But the old guard hated change. Veterans who carried the M1903 predicted disaster. They called the semi-auto fragile. They called it inaccurate. Officers feared the mechanism was too complex for a terrified recruit. The transition was messy. Chaos hit the supply lines. In the early months, ordnance personnel made a critical blunder. They accidentally shipped 5-round stripper clips meant for the Springfield to frontline units already carrying the Garand. The ordnance error was a logistical nightmare, but the real friction wasn't in the supply chain. It was in the steel. The ping. You have heard the myth. The empty clip hits the ground with a sharp metallic ring. This sound supposedly told every German in the sector that the American was defenseless. It is a fairy tale. In the chaos of a firefight, the ping is a whisper in a hurricane. For it to matter, a soldier had to be alone. The enemy had to be 5 feet away. The air had to be silent. It never was. Veterans from the Bulge to Okinawa insisted they couldn't hear the sound over their own heartbeat. Some legends claim GI threw empty clips onto rocks to bait the enemy. There is no record of this working in a real trench. The battlefield was too loud for games. The real danger wasn't the sound leaving the rifle, it was the steel returning to it. Enter the Garand thumb. The operating rod is under massive spring tension. You push the 8-round clip down. If your hand is out of position, the bolt snaps forward like a guillotine, a dull thud of steel hitting bone. The bolt slams the thumb against the receiver with enough force to crack the nail or crush the distal phalanx. It happened in the mud. It happened in the freezing rain. New recruits paid for their speed with shattered digits in every training camp from Georgia to California. You learned the technique quickly, or you learned it painfully. The reason for those broken thumbs and the coming victories was a simple U-shaped bracket. John Garand chose the en-bloc clip over a magazine for one reason: reliability. Army leadership feared the detachable box magazine. They believed soldiers would lose them in the mud of the trenches. An open magwell was a magnet for debris. To the generals, a removable magazine was a guaranteed jam. Garand's solution was a fixed internal box fed by a stamped steel clip holding 8 rounds. The mechanics were brutal. The shooter locked the bolt open and pressed the loaded clip deep into the receiver. A distinct click signaled engagement. Then, a slight pull back on the charging handle released the tension. The bolt snapped forward. It stripped the first round from the steel teeth and slammed it into the chamber. The rifle was now a semi-automatic engine. Each shot cycled the bolt. Each cycle raised the internal follower. On the 8th round, the follower hit its peak. It tripped the clip latch. The empty steel bracket caught the air with a metallic ping. 8 rounds were gone in seconds. The bolt remained locked to the rear. 1,000 rifles, every single day. The United States stood alone. On January 9, 1936, the Ordnance Department made the move. They designated the weapon as the U.S. rifle, caliber .30 M1. While Germany, Britain, and the Soviet Union clung to bolt-action designs from the previous century, Washington bet on a semi-automatic future. It was a massive industrial gamble. No other military power had ever dared to make a self-loading rifle their primary infantry arm. By June of 1941, the gamble took physical shape. Inside the Springfield Armory, the floor shook. Huge hydraulic presses slammed down to stamp out steel receiver blanks. Machinists slotted bolts into place with a metallic clatter. Workers laid finished rifles into wooden crates, row after row, hour after hour. The factory floor was a cacophony of screeching metal and thumping steam hammers. Speech was impossible. Only the output mattered. 1,000 rifles every 24 hours. That is enough to arm an entire infantry regiment every single day. To achieve this pace in 1941, Garand had to synchronize 3,500 individual parts. It was a mechanical ballet of precision engineering that seemed like madness just 5 years earlier. The massive stockpiles grew in silence while the Pacific remained calm. The attack on Pearl Harbor was 6 months away. Garand's production speed in 1941 was a miracle of engineering. But to reach those numbers, he had to kill his finest creation a decade earlier. The 1930 trials focused on a ghost, the .276 Pedersen. It was light, it was short, the brass casings were thin. Garand's rifle, chambered in this caliber, was a masterpiece of balance. Recoil was manageable. Semi-automatic fire felt natural. In 1930, the board looked at the data and gave its blessing. The .276 Garand was recommended for immediate adoption. Then, the Great Depression hit the Pentagon. General MacArthur looked at the balance sheets. He saw millions of rounds of .3006 ammunition sitting in damp warehouses. These were leftovers from the First World War, stale, heavy, but free. He saw the logistics of a new caliber as a catastrophe. Switching meant building new factories. It meant training armorers for a bullet that didn't exist in bulk. The High Command issued a cold rejection. They chose the warehouse over the drawing board. The contrast was absolute. The engineers had found the future in the .276. The bureaucrats demanded the past in the .3006. Garand watched 10 years of work vanish in a single memo. The lighter, elegant rifle was dead. The heavy, high-pressure round of the Great War was now his only option. He walked back to the Springfield Armory and cleared his desk. Garand picked up a pencil and began redrawing the receiver for the .3006. Adapting to the .3006 was a death sentence for most designs. John Cantius Garand arrived at Springfield Armory in 1919 to challenge that physics. He didn't look for stronger steel. He looked at the gas. The solution sat in a small cylinder mounted beneath the barrel. As the bullet traveled, a fraction of the propellant gases bled into this chamber. The pressure hit a piston. The piston shoved an operating rod. The rod cycled the heavy bolt. Click! The spent case flew out. A fresh round slammed home. Garand turned the cartridge's own violence into a precision sequence. The rifle used its own waste energy to do the mechanical labor. This distributed the brutal recoil forces instead of letting them shatter the receiver. By the mid-1920s, the Ordnance Department began grueling competitive trials. Garand's prototypes faced the best engineers from Winchester and Remington. They failed. Garand didn't. His gas-operated system remained functional after thousands of rounds of continuous fire. The pressure was the primary enemy. John Garand succeeded where engineers at Remington and Winchester failed for 3 decades. The problem lived inside the chamber. The standard 30-06 cartridge generated over 50,000 psi. This wasn't a hunting round, it was a beast of burden designed for trench warfare and long-range suppression. Commercial actions of the 1920s simply disintegrated under that stress. Why did the Army refuse to compromise? The 30-06 was a ballistic masterpiece. It could strike targets at 1,800 yards. But power demanded physics. A self-loading mechanism had to contain that explosion while slamming a heavy steel bolt back and forth at violent speeds. The Remington Model 8 existed, but it was a toy by comparison. It fired the .35 Remington, a round meant for deer under 200 yards. The military laughed at it. The brass wanted a rifle, not a lead spitter. Contenders arrived from every corner. The Danish Bang rifle tried and failed. Domestic experiments ended in twisted metal and jammed actions. The cartridge case was the final hurdle. It was long. It required a massive stroke of the bolt to cycle. This extra travel added weight, making every prototype too bulky for a foot soldier to carry. The Army demanded the impossible: a lightweight rifle with the punch of a machine gun. They wouldn't settle for less because the 30-06 hit at 1,800 yards. The requirement for 1,800 yards was not born on a firing range. It was written in the blood-soaked mud of Europe. 1919. The Great War was over, but the trauma remained. American planners looked at the butcher's bill and saw a failure of technology. The infantryman was a relic. He carried the spring-filled M1903, a fine weapon for the 19th century. In the 20th, it was a liability. Visual: a soldier's hand, mud-slicked fingers fumbling with a steel bolt. He fires one shot, he ducks. He hauls the bolt back, ejecting a spent brass casing. He pushes it forward. One shot every 3 seconds, if he was lucky, if he wasn't dead. Machine guns had turned the battlefield into a slaughterhouse. Artillery had pulverized the landscape. But the individual rifleman remained a manual laborer in a mechanized war. He could only fire as fast as his muscles allowed. The Pentagon demanded a miracle. They wanted the sustained fire of a machine gun without the 3-man crew. They wanted power without the 10-pound tripod. Every other army in the world accepted the bolt action as the limit of human engineering. The Americans refused. They sought a weapon that would move as fast as the mind, not the hand. The search for a semi-automatic solution officially began in 1919.